Matthew 5:21. Now, this is going to start, the rest of Matthew 5 is going to be a section called the Six Antitheses, basically saying you've heard one thing said, but I tell you another thing. I tell you the antithesis of what you've heard. Now, it's going to come across initially, as you read this, that Jesus is critiquing the Old Testament law itself, which he just got done saying he's not here to do. Because he starts off by saying, you've heard it said, and then he quotes something that looks like it comes from the Old Testament. Most of the times it does come from the Old Testament. And then he says, but I tell you this instead. What he's really doing, so it comes across as though he's actually doing exactly what he said he wasn't going to do previously, and that he's here to critique the Old Testament law. What he's really doing, he's doing two things. He is critiquing the way the Old Testament law is being taught in their day. So when it says you've heard it said, he's not saying this is what the Old Testament said. This is not what the Lord said to Moses. He's basically saying this is what they're saying about the Old Testament. This is what they're saying about the law. This is how they're teaching it. You've heard them teach it this way. That's what he's saying. So he's critiquing that. He's critiquing the authorities' teaching of the Old Testament. He's not critiquing the law itself. He's critiquing the authorities' teaching of it in that day and time. He's also trying to explain how we should really see it. Instead of critiquing the law, he's trying to explain how we should really view it, how we should really understand it. That's what he's doing. He's going to be doing this for the rest of chapter 5. You have heard it said, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. So the attitude that leads to murder begins in the heart, or the mind, however you want to view it. It's not just the action of committing murder. That's bad, okay? We're not saying that's not bad. We're not saying it's good to commit murder. But he's condemning not just the act of murder, but the attitude that leads to the act of murder. Because the plan to kill someone comes from somewhere in your being, okay? You don't just murder somebody. The action of murder itself is precipitated by an attitude that leads to murder. Now maybe it's heat of the moment. Maybe that attitude comes very quickly, and the opportunity to murder someone presents itself, and the attitude overtakes you in the heat of the moment, and you do. Okay? Sometimes it can boil for a long time. Sometimes your attitude to murder someone can boil over for a long time before you finally commit the action. That can happen too. In either case, it's not just the act of murder that is condemned, although it is condemned. It's the attitude that leads to the act of murder, because it has to come from somewhere. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, which down here in a footnote means an Aramaic term of contempt, like you airhead, or you bubblehead, or you butthead, or something like that, will be answerable to the council, or the Sanhedrin. So to say that, you could actually get drawn to court. If you insulted your neighbor, your brother, your fellow Israelite, by calling him an airhead or a doofus, he could drag you into court and hold you accountable, legally accountable for that. So anyone who says that is legally accountable to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, the ruling court authority at that time. But anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. So it's not just a matter of being held legally responsible. It's about having the attitude of superiority over your brother in your heart. Now, what does this mean? Okay, so fool goes back to that term we read in the book of Proverbs over and over, fool, which in that case stood for a person who made poor moral decisions. He's a guy who went down the wrong road. Proverbs is all about presenting two ways in life, the way of wisdom or the way of folly. And a fool is someone who chose folly, or someone who did not choose the road that leads to wisdom, did not pursue Lady Wisdom, but went down and was enticed and went down the road that leads to Lady Folly. It can also mean that in our language, fool can mean dumb person, like stupid person, idiot. And he just got done talking about this raka, which is an idiot, a term that basically means idiot. I'm not sure if he's referring to that or if he's referring to the typical Old Testament term that means morally deficient person. I'm not clear. I don't know language that well to be able to tell you whether he's saying, if you call your brother an idiot and you're in danger of hellfire, or call your brother a morally deficient person, I'm not sure. But he's basically saying, don't have these attitudes towards your brother in your heart, and especially in particular, don't have an attitude of superiority. Okay, if you're going to condemn your brother as a fool, don't be a fool yourself. Fire of hell means being cast out into the dump. Okay. And now he is not in Jerusalem here. He's in some mountain in Galilee somewhere. But the people he and the people he's speaking to all would have been familiar with the burning trash dump that was just outside Jerusalem, and what we call hell. And that's where we get the term from. The term hell here, the word behind that in Greek is Gehenna, and that goes back to the Old Testament term of Ben Hinnom, which means son of Hinnom. There was a valley. We read about this all the way back in Joshua. There was a valley outside Jerusalem called the Valley of Ben Hinnom, the Valley of the son of Hinnom. I have no idea who Hinnom is, but apparently he was the original owner of that territory that they eventually named a valley after, or his son was at least. And it's just outside Jerusalem. And this valley is where, in Jeremiah's day, they began conducting their child sacrifice rituals, where they would burn their infant children in fire. And Jeremiah himself went out there with the people and had a broken pot shard and smashed. And they also threw their pot shards out there. Jeremiah got a pot from the potter's gate. Apparently, the potters would throw their refuse with their broken pots or their leftover discarded pieces. They would throw them out the gate into this valley or this pile outside the city. And so Jeremiah gets a pot. He goes out there with them. He breaks the pot and says, God is going to burn you, just like you've been burning your infant children in this valley. God is going to let your bodies rot in this valley. And so that's what happened when the city fell. It was a dump for a pile of corpses. And so from that point, when they came back to the land, and it developed a very negative reputation, obviously. And in Jesus' day, it was their city dump, and they had a fire there that burned continuously, burning up their trash. So this goes back to the idea of being cast out. Okay, it's outside the city, it's outside the gates, it's where the trash gets thrown. So if you're having this attitude in your mind that you're superior to your brother, if you're holding these negative attitudes towards your brother in your heart that lead to murder, for example, you're putting yourself in danger of being cast out of the city, cast out of the community, into the dump, into the fire where the trash gets thrown. And that goes back again to the law, where the punishment for sins was either death or excommunication. Okay? You commit a capital offense in the Old Testament law and you get put to death, or you get cut off. I'm not, in some cases it's clear that you get put to death. In some cases the offender is clearly meant to be put to death, stoned, taken outside the camp and stoned. In some cases the offender is only meant to be cut off. And I'm not really clear if that means death or if it means being just excommunicated, just like cast out of the community. Because there are some instances where the offender is to be just cast out. And in the New Testament, that's going to be one of the punishments for sin within the church. If you have an offender within the church who refuses to repent, cast him out. Don't kill him. We don't have the authority to do that in the church. We don't have the authority to put anyone to death. Otherwise, nobody would go to church. But we do have the authority to excommunicate unrepentant sinners who are in the church who are not giving up their sin. If they've been confronted by it multiple times and they don't repent, we have the authority to cast them out. We have the authority to excommunicate them. And so that's the idea here, okay? We think of hell as being burning, your soul is on fire forever or whatever, but that's not actually what that means. It means being cast out of the community and out of the city, out of the ranks of the chosen people, into the fire, into the dump, to be burned up. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you. Remember, they're not in Jerusalem right now. They're in Galilee. They're north of Jerusalem. You bring your stuff to Jerusalem. They didn't have permission at this point to worship anywhere but Jerusalem. So from where they are, sitting on this mountain in Galilee, they would have to travel to Jerusalem to offer their gift. But if you're there and you remember, oh, I have a problem with my brother, he has a problem with me, you're supposed to leave your gift there and go back to where you came from, and then go back to offer your gift again later. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and reconcile to your brother. Then, come and offer your gift. So if you're going from Galilee to Jerusalem to offer your gift, then you remember, oh, I have a problem with my brother. My brother has a problem with me. Leave your gift there, go back to Galilee, get reconciled with your brother, then go back to Jerusalem and offer your gift. That's how important it is. That's how important. That goes back to what he was saying with the Beatitudes also. That goes back to peacemaking. Be reconciled. Reconcile yourself. If you're a peacemaker, you'll be a son of God. You'll be a child of God. You'll be representing God and exhibiting His traits like a son exhibits the traits of his father. Again, Jesus said to His disciples, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So if you're being taken to court, it probably means you did something wrong, okay? The assumption here is that if you're the defendant, you did something to be accused, worthy of being, and likely the case is not going to go in your favor when it gets in front of the judge. They have a different court system than we do today. Okay, so if someone is bringing you to court, very likely that person actually has a legitimate, provable claim against you, and you are going to lose. Most likely, but probably, possibly not. He could be a false witness. He could be mistaken. Okay, there are laws in the Old Testament about protecting defendants from false testimony, and there are. But most likely, if the plaintiff is going to all the trouble to bring you in front of the court, he's right and you're wrong. Most likely, you legitimately did something to cause this grievance, for which you are being sued or taken to court for. So you're better off reconciling with him before the courts get a hold of you and punish you. You're better off settling with him on the way. This principle still somewhat applies even today, even in our very different court system, where you have these out-of-court settlements that take place before you actually get to court. If the defending party, especially when they're being sued, knows that they did something for which the plaintiff has a legitimate claim and can prove that legitimate claim, very frequently the defending party will offer an out-of-court settlement first in order to avoid the harsher penalties that would come if they are found liable in the court. And so that principle still applies in some way or another, even in our day and time with our very different court system. Again, Jesus said to His disciples, you have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Oh man, that's hard. That's hard. Why do you have to say that, Jesus? Now you're going to make every one of us feel bad. That's a tough one. If your right eye causes you to sin, Mark has this in his gospel too, in a different place. Gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell, be cast out of the city, be cast into the dump, be excommunicated, be thrown out, be burned up. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, I don't believe this has ever actually happened, The New Testament records no examples of anyone ever actually doing this, and I am not familiar with any instances where anyone ever actually mutilated themselves for the sake of preventing, because that actually won't prevent sin. Okay, like that, simply doing that, it kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier about the law being a series of external regulations. But simply following the law, simply following those external regulations, those rules, or the traditions that built up around those rules, that doesn't change the attitude problem. You know, going back to what we said about the attitude towards your brother. In this case, it's an attitude towards a woman. All right? Simply changing the rules doesn't change the interior attitudes that lead to the law-breaking actions. Okay? So simply cutting off your hand or your eye itself isn't actually going to be effective because the attitude will still be there. He's saying that you got to get down in there deep. You got to get down to the root of the problem, somewhere deep in your being, your heart, your mind, and root out that troubling influence that is causing the attitude that will eventually lead to the action. If you call your brother a fool or an airhead enough time, you're going to develop a negative attitude around him. If you look after a woman lustfully enough times, you're going to develop a negative attitude about her, about other women, or maybe about your wife if you're married. If you're looking at other women lustfully, that's going to lead to actions that are going to condemn you. The problem is the attitude which leads. The action itself is condemned. The law condemned those actions, but really you need to get to the heart of the problem, which is the attitude behind those actions. Again, Jesus said to his disciples, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce." This is based on Deuteronomy 24:1. I'll go back and look at that briefly. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him, because he finds out something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. Okay. And if after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man. So he goes on to talk about what happens to that woman afterwards. But they were taking this text in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1, to give themselves permission to send their wives away for all kinds of frivolous reasons. So they were abusing that was really just a clause. Because that's not even a law by itself. It was an if statement. Like, if you find out something indecent about your wife, and you write her certificate of divorce and send her out of your house, then this happens. So it wasn't even a clause. It wasn't even a law by itself. But they were taking that to mean, we can send our wives away. If we want this young, pretty woman, if we've had this woman, we married her for 20 years, and she's no longer pretty, she's no longer favorable to me, and I want to marry this 19-year-old girl instead, I'm going to write my wife a certificate of divorce, get her out of my house, and get this other woman instead. Or something like that. That's what we would do today. Okay? But something like that. It's like, if I want to get rid of my wife, I can think of pretty much any reason I want to do that legally, send her a certificate, give her a certificate of divorce, get her out of my house, and then find some other woman to take her place. So he's limiting that. The idea here behind his teaching is to limit that impulse of men to get rid of their wives when they're no longer interested in them. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce and get rid of her, send her away. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, by the way, women do not have the legal right to divorce in this culture. So this doesn't, they can't send their husbands away. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. Anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. You're going to have more about this to say about this later on as well. And Paul will elaborate on this as well in 1 Corinthians 7. So we have more to say about the matter of marriage and divorce. But right now, again, he's looking at the attitude. He's saying it's not just about the action; it's about the attitude that leads to the action. We saw this with the contempt for your brother that leads to strife in the families or murder even. We saw this about, contempt between neighbors that leads to lawsuits and filings in the courts, and about adultery that leads to strife in the households and sexual immorality and divorce. Okay, and he's saying it's the actions themselves are condemned. The law condemned these actions, but it's really the attitude behind those actions that we need to get at, and we need to take that seriously. We need to get in there. We need to find that where that source of that attitude is. We need to root it out and throw it away. Otherwise, it will be thrown away. If we don't cut off our right arm or our right eye or whatever corresponding metaphysical part of our thought processes lead to these actions, if we don't cut that out and throw it away, we'll eventually be cut out and thrown away and tossed out of the city into the fire dump and burn up out there. That's what he's teaching here.